Most people grow up accepting limits as permanent features of their lives. They believe their intelligence, their circumstances, their abilities, even their level of ambition are things set in stone by birth, by environment, or by luck. This is one of the greatest myths that holds humanity back. The myth of ordinary limits convinces us that we have to play within boundaries drawn by other people, by tradition, or by fear of failure. But what if those limits aren't real? What if they are simply untested assumptions, inherited beliefs, or illusions reinforced by repetition? The truth is that most of what we consider limits are just lines drawn in sand, and like sand, they can be reshaped, moved, and redefined once you decide to stop treating them as walls and start treating them as challenges. I've seen this play out repeatedly in business, technology, and personal growth. People say, "That's impossible, it's too expensive, it's too risky, it's too late." And then someone else ignores those voices, applies first principles thinking, and proves that the so-called limit was nothing more than a shared assumption. Rockets were once thought to be government-only projects, untouchable for private industry. Electric cars were dismissed as impractical, doomed to fail because batteries couldn't compete with gasoline. Yet both of these assumptions collapsed the moment we asked a different question, not, "Why can't it be done?" but, "What conditions would make it possible?" The same is true in your own life. When you think about your dreams, your goals, or the things you wish you could achieve but secretly believe you can't, ask yourself, where does that belief come from? Did you test it yourself, or did you absorb it from the world around you? Because most people never test the walls that cage them. They rattle the bars a little, feel resistance, and conclude escape is impossible. But real progress begins when you question whether the bars are even locked in the first place. The myth of ordinary limits doesn't just shape what people attempt, it shapes how they think. When you believe limits are permanent, your brain stops searching for solutions. It accepts problems as unsolvable, and in doing so, it cuts off the creativity and persistence that would have revealed a path forward. The biggest difference I've seen between people who accomplish extraordinary things and people who settle for mediocrity is not intelligence or talent, but their relationship with limits. The extraordinary ones treat limits as temporary conditions, puzzles to solve, or constraints to engineer around. The mediocre ones treat limits as laws of nature. And here's the key. Both groups are often facing the exact same circumstances. It's not the external situation that makes the difference. It's the mindset. First principles thinking is the antidote to the myth of limits. Instead of accepting the way things have always been done, you break the problem down to its fundamental truths and build from there. For example, if people say batteries will never work for cars because they're too heavy and too weak, the first principles approach is to ask, what is a battery? What is its energy density? What materials are possible? How could you re-engineer the chemistry? Suddenly, the problem is no longer impossible. It's just a set of variables waiting to be optimized. You can apply the exact same logic to your personal challenges. If you believe you can't change careers because you don't have the right degree, ask yourself, what skills does the job actually require? How can those skills be acquired in the fastest, most direct way? If you believe you can't start a business because you don't have capital, ask, what's the minimum viable version of this idea that could be tested with almost no money? Every limit looks different when you stop accepting it as final and start treating it like a design problem. Human beings are natural engineers of survival and progress, but somewhere along the way, society convinces us to stop engineering our own futures. We're taught to stay in our lane, follow the script, and not take risks that might expose us to failure. But failure is not the enemy. Failure is simply feedback. It's data that tells you what doesn't work so you can get closer to what does. Believing in ordinary limits makes failure look fatal. Thinking beyond limits makes failure look like an experiment. Imagine if humanity had treated gravity as an unbreakable limit rather than a force to be understood and worked with. Airplanes, rockets, and satellites would have remained fantasies, but because people question the permanence of that limit, we now explore space. On a personal level, your gravity might be fear of rejection, financial insecurity, or lack of confidence. Those forces are real, but they are not permanent prisons. They are variables to study, forces to counterbalance, challenges to engineer around. And once you see them that way, they lose their power to define you. The myth of ordinary limits is comfortable. It gives you an excuse to stay where you are, to avoid risk, to avoid disappointment. But it also guarantees that you will never access your true potential. The moment you decide to question it, you step into a different reality where possibilities expand, problems become solvable, and your own capacity grows with every challenge you face. That's why I say the first step to building anything extraordinary is not technology, not resources, not connections, it's mindset. It's the courage to refuse the myth of limits and to ask better questions about what's possible. Once you do that, you've already separated yourself from 90% of people who are still living inside cages they never tested. And the truth is, once you push against those walls, you'll often find they were never made of steel. They were made of paper. Tear them down, and you'll discover that the boundaries of your life were never fixed. They were waiting for you to redraw them. There's a deeply ingrained belief in society that hard work is the ultimate answer to every problem, that if you simply push yourself longer, grind harder, sacrifice more sleep, and add more hours, eventually success will come. And while effort absolutely matters and discipline can move mountains, the truth is that hard work alone is often a trap, because if the system you're working inside is flawed, no amount of effort can compensate for that. It's like trying to launch a rocket with a faulty engine. Adding more fuel won't help. You can work yourself to exhaustion, but if the design itself is broken, all that energy is wasted. I've seen countless people who are brilliant, talented, and relentlessly hardworking, yet they hit a ceiling they can't break through because they never stop to examine the system itself. They believe that doubling their output will double their results, when in reality the returns diminish the harder they push against a broken process. This is the difference between approaching life with brute force and approaching it with engineering. An engineer doesn't just add more power to a machine that isn't working. They open it up, look at the structure, examine where energy is being lost, and redesign it so that the same input produces more output. That's what separates people who achieve exponential results from people who remain stuck no matter how much they sweat. They don't just work hard, they build smarter systems. Think about a student who spends 10 hours a day rereading textbooks in preparation for an exam. They may be incredibly hardworking, but if their system of learning is inefficient, they'll still struggle. Meanwhile, another student might spend 4 hours practicing active recall, testing themselves, and creating mental models, and outperform the first one easily. The second student isn't lazier. They've just designed a smarter system. The same applies in business. You can have a team that works 80 hours a week, but operates in silos, constantly duplicating efforts and solving the wrong problems. Or you can have a team that works 50 hours with clear communication, efficient processes, and well-designed priorities, and they'll achieve more with less strain. The principle holds in health, in relationships, in personal goals. Systems eat raw effort for breakfast. That doesn't mean effort is irrelevant. It means effort must be applied within a framework that multiplies it instead of diluting it. Elon Musk didn't try to make rockets cheaper by simply hiring more people to work longer hours. He questioned the system itself. Why are rockets so expensive? Break it down. What are the materials? What are the supply chains? What are the assumptions behind reusability? By redesigning the system, SpaceX achieved breakthroughs that entire industries said were impossible. The same principle applies to your personal life. If you're constantly exhausted working harder every year but not seeing better results, maybe the issue isn't your dedication. Maybe the issue is your system. Do you have habits that create leverage, or do you rely on willpower alone? Do you automate decisions that don't matter so your energy is saved for the ones that do? Do you track your progress in a way that makes feedback obvious, or are you running blind and hoping for improvement? Most people never ask these questions because they're addicted to the narrative of hustle. They think struggle equals virtue, but struggle without intelligent design is just wasted life. Systems give you compound returns. For example, creating a habit of writing down your 3 most important tasks every morning can save hours of wasted time spent on low-value work. Setting up automatic savings and investments builds wealth, even when you're not thinking about it. Designing rituals with your partner, like weekly check-ins about your relationship, creates resilience that prevents small issues from becoming major fractures. These are not dramatic acts of effort. They are smart systems that quietly multiply results. Working harder in a broken system can actually make things worse, because the more you reinforce inefficiency, the deeper you entrench it. It's like pouring water into a leaking bucket. The harder you pour, the faster you lose. The smarter approach is to stop, examine the bucket, and patch the leak before adding more water. The courage to pause, rethink, and redesign is often harder than the courage to keep grinding, because it feels like stopping means you're not working. But in reality, stopping to fix the system is the highest form of productivity. This is why first principles matter so much. Instead of asking, how can I work harder? Ask, what is the actual outcome I want, And what is the simplest, most efficient system that produces it consistently? When you think like this, you stop measuring your worth by hours worked and start measuring it by results achieved. And results scale infinitely better when systems support them. It's the same in relationships. Couples can spend years working hard on their marriage by having endless arguments, therapy sessions, and repeated apologies. But if the underlying system of communication is broken, if they don't know how to listen, how to de-escalate, how to resolve conflict, they're just cycling harder on a treadmill that goes nowhere. Build the system, and suddenly progress becomes natural. Hard work is fuel. Systems are engines. Without an engine, fuel burns out fast. With the right engine, even a small amount of fuel can take you far. The key insight is that life doesn't reward effort directly. It rewards the effectiveness of the system that effort flows into. So if you want exponential growth, stop glorifying grind for its own sake and start engineering the structures that make effort compound. Build systems that turn discipline into momentum, habits into autopilot success, and setbacks into data for improvement. Once you do that, you'll find that working hard becomes powerful instead of exhausting because you're no longer pushing against broken design. You're fueling a machine built to win. Every one of us is running on invisible code, a set of mental programs written long before we became aware enough to question them. This code is not something we chose consciously, yet it dictates our choices, our reactions, our ambitions, and even the ceilings we hit in life. You can think of it like the operating system inside your brain. Just as a computer executes commands based on the code it's given, you execute patterns of thought and behavior based on beliefs and assumptions you absorbed from your environment, your upbringing, your culture, and your past experiences. The dangerous part is that most of this code runs unconsciously. You don't see it, but you live inside it every day. When you hesitate to take a risk, when you procrastinate on a project that could change your life, when you talk yourself out of a dream by listing reasons why it won't work, that's not logic speaking, it's code. Somewhere in your past, you learned to equate risk with danger, or failure with humiliation, or ambition with arrogance, and now that program runs automatically in the background, limiting your actions without you even noticing. The invisible code shows up in subtle ways. Maybe you grew up hearing that money is scarce and that wealthy people are selfish. Now, without realizing it, every time you get close to financial success, you sabotage yourself because deep down you don't want to become the kind of person you were taught to dislike. Or maybe you were told as a child that you weren't good at speaking, and now as an adult you avoid opportunities to share your ideas in public, even though your insight could change the direction of your career. The code is powerful because it disguises itself as truth. You don't think, this is just a belief I inherited. You think, this is the way the world works. And that difference determines everything. The gap between those who break through barriers and those who stay stuck isn't usually about talent or intelligence. It's about who has the courage to examine the invisible code and decide whether it deserves to keep running. The invisible code also affects how you see yourself. If your code says you're not the kind of person who leads, you'll unconsciously hold back even when opportunities appear. If your code says you're not capable of great success, you'll settle for mediocrity, not because you lack ability, but because your operating system never executes the command to go further. And yet, this code isn't permanent. Just like any software, it can be debugged, rewritten, and upgraded. The first step is awareness. You have to start noticing the patterns of thought that control you. Ask yourself, what assumptions am I making without testing? What fears repeat themselves in my decisions? What beliefs about myself feel like facts, but might actually be stories? For example, if you catch yourself thinking, I could never start a business because I'm not a risk taker, pause and ask, where did that belief come from? Did I decide that? Or did I learn it from someone else's fears? That question alone begins to weaken the grip of old code. Elon Musk often speaks about using first principles thinking to strip a problem down to its basics. You can do the same with your mental code. If your program says, this goal is impossible, break it down. What makes it impossible? Is it a law of physics? If not, then maybe it's just a belief. If it's just a belief, then it's code, and code can be rewritten. Once you see the code, you can begin to experiment with new lines. Instead of, I'm not a risk taker, you can test, I can take small, calculated risks and learn from them. Instead of, I'll never be good at public speaking, you can test, I can improve with practice. The goal isn't to delude yourself with blind positivity. The goal is to rewrite programs so they align with reality and with the outcomes you want. The invisible code doesn't just shape your individual actions, it shapes your entire trajectory. People who believe they can grow, adapt, and learn new skills build entirely different lives from those who believe they're fixed in place. The first group creates opportunities where none existed. The second group ignores opportunities that were available all along. The tragedy is that both groups are often equally capable, but one is running empowering code while the other is running limiting code. The most important realization is that the code you inherited isn't your identity. It's just programming. And programming can be updated. You wouldn't keep running outdated software on your phone and expect it to work flawlessly. Yet many people are running on mental software that was written decades ago, in childhood, in school, or in their first jobs. If you want extraordinary results, you need to upgrade the operating system. That means challenging the invisible assumptions, questioning the automatic fears, and deliberately writing new code based on tested truths rather than inherited myths. The process is uncomfortable because the brain clings to familiar programs, even when they're harmful. But once you experience the freedom of rewriting just one line of code, of proving to yourself that a limitation you thought was permanent is actually flexible, you'll never see your mind the same way again. And from there, every belief becomes a candidate for testing, every limitation becomes an opportunity to rewrite, and every old assumption becomes a chance to install an upgrade. The invisible code running your life doesn't have to stay invisible. The moment you decide to examine it, you take control of the system. And once you control the system, you control the trajectory of your future. If the invisible code running your life is full of outdated or limiting beliefs, then the next step is to learn how to debug and reprogram that code so it actually works in your favor. Think about how engineers deal with a piece of software that isn't functioning correctly. They don't just yell at the computer to run faster or blame the hardware for not being strong enough. They go into the code line by line to identify the errors, test assumptions, and rewrite the parts that are producing the wrong outputs. The same principle applies to your own mind. You can't just force yourself to work harder when the underlying beliefs are flawed, because those beliefs will keep generating the same dysfunctional patterns no matter how much energy you throw at them. The only way forward is to pause, examine, and rewrite. Debugging begins with awareness, the willingness to step back and observe yourself like an outside engineer observing a machine. Ask, what recurring problems keep showing up in my life? Maybe you start projects with excitement but abandon them halfway through. Maybe you avoid risk even when the potential upside is massive. Maybe you self-sabotage relationships when they start to feel too real. These repeating glitches are signals. They're like error messages telling you that some piece of code deep inside your system is producing the same output again and again. Once you've identified the glitch, the next step is to trace it back to the underlying belief. For example, if you constantly abandon projects, maybe the code you're running says, "I'm not capable of finishing big things." If you avoid risk, maybe your code says, "Failure means I'm worthless." If you sabotage relationships, maybe your code says, "I don't deserve love." These beliefs often come from early experiences, but they continue to run silently in adulthood unless you bring them to the surface. Debugging requires brutal honesty. It's not about blaming the past. It's about acknowledging that you are still running programs written years ago that no longer serve you. Once you see the code clearly, you can begin the reprogramming process. Reprogramming doesn't mean repeating positive affirmations mindlessly or pretending everything is fine. It means deliberately testing new beliefs through action and evidence, just like engineers test new lines of code through iteration. If your old code says, "I'm not capable of finishing big things," reprogramming means starting with a small project and committing to finish it no matter what. When you do, you create new evidence for your brain that contradicts the old belief. Evidence is the language your mind listens to. Words alone are not enough. If your old code says, "Failure means I'm worthless," then reprogramming means intentionally reframing failure as data. When you try something and it doesn't work, you pause, analyze, and record the lesson. Over time, your brain learns that failure is not the end but part of the process. Elon Musk has said many times, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." That's reprogramming at its core. Instead of treating failure as a verdict on your value, you treat it as feedback that refines your system. The next step in reprogramming is reinforcement. Just like software has to be run repeatedly to prove it works, your new beliefs need repetition through behavior. You can't rewrite a single line of code once and expect the system to operate differently forever. You have to run the new code again and again until it becomes the default. For example, if you're reprogramming yourself to believe, I deserve love, then you practice staying present in relationships, even when vulnerability feels scary. Each time you don't sabotage, each time you allow closeness, you're reinforcing the new belief. Over time, the system stabilizes around the new code. Reprogramming also benefits from environment design. Engineers don't test new code in chaos. They build clean testing environments. Likewise, you can create contexts that support your new beliefs. If you're trying to adopt the belief that you're capable of bold action, surround yourself with people who encourage and celebrate boldness. If you're trying to adopt the belief that you can build wealth, spend time around people who treat wealth building as normal and attainable. Your environment is like the hardware. Your code runs on it, amplifies or undermines your new programming. Another crucial piece of reprogramming is iteration. No engineer writes perfect code on the first try. They write, test, adjust, rewrite. That's exactly how you reprogram beliefs. You'll test a new belief, run into resistance, refine it, and test again. Maybe you rewrite, I'm not good at public speaking, into, I can learn to improve at public speaking. You give a speech, it goes badly, and your old code tries to reassert itself. That's just feedback. You iterate. Maybe the code needs to say, I can improve at public speaking through practice and feedback. Then you test again. Over time, each cycle strengthens the new program. The final step is integration, the point where the new belief stops feeling like an experiment and starts feeling natural. That's when you know the reprogramming has worked. The glitch that once held you back no longer produces errors. The system runs smoothly. And just like updating software, the improvement seems obvious in hindsight. You wonder why you didn't make the change earlier. Debugging and reprogramming beliefs is not a one-time process. It's a lifelong discipline. Just as software requires constant updates to stay secure and efficient, your mental code requires ongoing maintenance. The world changes, your goals evolve, and old programs can re-emerge. But if you embrace debugging as a normal part of life, you'll never be trapped by outdated code again. Instead, you'll see every glitch as an opportunity to upgrade, every setback as a clue pointing toward faulty programming, and every success as proof that the new code works. That's how you turn your mind into a high-functioning system, by refusing to accept invisible limits as permanent and by continuously rewriting your internal operating system to match the extraordinary life you're building. When you begin to change your internal code, the effects don't stay contained within you. They ripple outward into every part of your life and into the lives of the people around you. It's like upgrading the core operating system on a central server. Suddenly, every device connected to it starts running better. People often underestimate how much their internal state silently broadcasts itself to others. You can say the right words, you can project a confident image, but if your internal code is full of doubt and fear, people pick up on it. Humans are wired to sense authenticity. Employees notice when their leader doesn't actually believe in the mission. Partners notice when you don't believe you're worthy of love. Investors notice when you pitch with rehearsed confidence but internal hesitation. The world mirrors back the code you're running, whether you like it or not. That's why internal change has such a massive ripple effect. Once you rewrite your own limiting beliefs, you start unconsciously giving permission for others to do the same. Imagine a leader who once operated from scarcity, constantly worried about money, constantly transmitting stress to their team. After debugging their beliefs and installing a new code that says opportunities are created, not waited for, their behavior shifts. They stop panicking when things go wrong and start focusing on solutions. The team, in turn, feels more stable, more creative, and more willing to take initiative. The leader didn't just change themselves, they changed the entire performance of the group. This is how one person's internal upgrade becomes everyone's external advantage. In your personal life, the ripple is just as strong. If your old code made you sabotage relationships out of fear of vulnerability, you probably communicated mixed signals, closeness followed by withdrawal, warmth followed by coldness. People around you felt uncertain, maybe even unloved. But when you reprogram the code to say, I am safe being fully seen, your behavior stabilizes. You show up consistently. You express love without hesitation, and the other person relaxes into trust. Suddenly, the relationship feels stronger, not because the other person changed, but because your code did. The ripple effect works in subtle ways too. When you change your code about health, deciding, I value my body and I take care of it, the people around you notice your energy rise. You become more active, more positive, more engaged. Friends might be inspired to take better care of themselves. Family members might rethink their own habits. Your private decision creates public impact. This is why I say internal change is never selfish. It's the opposite. By upgrading your own code, you raise the baseline for everyone connected to you. Think about innovation. One breakthrough doesn't just change the life of the inventor, it alters the trajectory of industries, economies, and societies. The same principle applies to your mental programming. When you prove to yourself that a limitation isn't permanent, you demonstrate to others that their limitations aren't permanent either. Your courage creates a ripple of possibility. Elon Musk didn't just build rockets, he changed how people think about what's possible in space travel. His internal code said, it doesn't have to cost billions to launch a rocket, and when he reprogrammed around that belief, the ripple effect reached NASA, the aerospace industry, and even kids dreaming about Mars. That's the power of an internal shift, expressed externally. The ripple effect also influences how you communicate. When your code is based on fear, your conversations are full of defensiveness, excuses, and avoidance. But when your code is based on possibility and resilience, your words carry conviction. People lean in when you speak because they can feel you actually believe what you're saying. That energy builds trust faster than any polished presentation ever could. The ripple doesn't stop with the people you know personally. It extends to everyone who interacts with your work. A writer who upgrades their code from "I'm not good enough" to "my voice has value" writes differently. That new energy resonates with readers, who then feel empowered themselves. A teacher who upgrades their code from "kids don't listen" to "kids rise to the expectations I set" changes the trajectory of entire classrooms. This is how quiet, internal revolutions lead to loud external transformations. And here's the most overlooked part: the ripple effect comes back to you. When your new code changes how others respond, their responses reinforce your new belief, creating a feedback loop. If your old code said, "I'm not a leader," people treated you like a follower. When you reprogram to "I lead by creating value," you begin to act differently. Others recognize it, they respond with respect and trust, and their response strengthens your new identity. Internal change becomes external evidence, which becomes further internal change. The ripple creates momentum. Over time, this momentum compounds. Just like compound interest makes small financial investments grow huge, compound impact makes small internal shifts transform entire lives. One decision to debug a limiting belief about money can ripple into financial stability, which ripples into the freedom to pursue dreams, which ripples into inspiring others to pursue theirs. One reprogrammed belief about worthiness can ripple into a stronger marriage, which ripples into healthier kids, which ripples into communities where love feels more normal than fear. This is why debugging and reprogramming isn't just about you, it's about everyone who touches your life. The ripple effect is proof that the most valuable contribution you can make to the world is becoming the highest functioning version of yourself. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because your authentic code naturally changes the environment around you. People respond to your presence differently when you're operating from upgraded software. They feel safer, more inspired, more willing to take risks. That's the hidden leverage of internal change. Most people think leverage comes from money, technology, or connections. But the deepest leverage comes from identity, from the invisible code you broadcast with every word and action. Upgrade the code, and you upgrade the leverage. Debug your fears, and you debug the fears of those who look to you for cues. Reprogram your possibilities, and you multiply the possibilities of those within your reach. This ripple never stops. Every upgrade creates waves you may never see, but that still shape the lives of people you'll never meet. That's the true scope of internal change. You're not just rewriting your own story. You're rewriting the stories of everyone touched by your existence. Happiness and resilience are not accidents. They are designs, engineered outcomes that come from deliberately shaping the systems of your life, rather than hoping that circumstances will be kind to you. Too many people treat happiness as if it were luck, a lottery ticket that some people win because of good fortune, while others resign themselves to a life of struggle because they believe they were born into the wrong conditions. But if you study the most fulfilled and resilient people, you'll notice that their joy is not passive, it's intentional. They don't wait for external events to make them feel good. They build environments, habits, and mindsets that generate happiness regardless of what's happening outside. Resilience works the same way. It isn't just an innate trait some people magically have, it's a muscle that can be trained through consistent practice. Designing happiness begins with clarity about what actually produces joy. Consumer culture constantly tries to sell you the idea that happiness is a product. Buy this car, wear this watch, upgrade this device, and you'll feel fulfilled. But real happiness comes from experiences, from growth, from connection, and from meaning. So if you want happiness that lasts, you design a life around those elements. That might mean investing more in shared adventures than in possessions, prioritizing deep conversations over endless distractions, and creating rituals that remind you of gratitude every single day. The second layer of design is environment. Just like engineers build controlled environments to test new systems, you can shape your home, your routines, and your community to reinforce happiness. A cluttered space filled with reminders of past failures will make joy difficult, while a space that reflects your values and aspirations will energize you. Imagine walking into a home where the walls display memories of adventure, where the bookshelves invite curiosity, and where the atmosphere reminds you daily of the life you're building. That's not decoration, that's engineering happiness. Another part of the design is intentional use of time. Happiness evaporates when your schedule is consumed entirely by obligations that drain you. Resilient people build systems that protect time for rest, creativity, and relationships, even when their responsibilities are massive. Elon Musk himself works insane hours, but he also engineers his calendar to ensure that certain priorities are never ignored, whether that's spending time with his kids or focusing on projects that energize him most. Designing happiness means recognizing that time is your most valuable currency, and the way you spend it is the clearest expression of what kind of life you're building. Resilience, meanwhile, is about designing systems that make recovery inevitable after setbacks. Life will always bring stress, loss, and disappointment. The question is not whether those things happen, but whether you have built the capacity to bounce back. Resilience starts with mindset, the belief that challenges are not roadblocks, but feedback, opportunities to adapt and grow. That mindset is strengthened by practice, by deliberately putting yourself in situations where you stretch your comfort zone, fail safely, and learn to recover quickly. Every time you push beyond your current capacity and survive, you're training your resilience muscle. Another design principle for resilience is redundancy. In engineering, redundancy means creating backup systems so the whole mission doesn't fail if one part breaks down. In life, resilience means having multiple sources of meaning and stability so that when one area takes a hit, maybe your job, maybe your finances, you don't collapse entirely. If your entire sense of worth is tied to one role or one outcome, you're fragile. But if you've built a life where fulfillment comes from multiple domains, work, family, learning, creativity, contribution, then you're resilient, because a setback in one domain won't destroy your overall sense of purpose. Community is another core element of resilience design. Human beings are not meant to endure life alone, and yet many people isolate themselves when things get hard. Designing resilience means proactively building relationships of trust, where mutual support is available before crises hit. It means being willing to both give and receive help, to understand that resilience is not just personal toughness but shared strength. Elon Musk often emphasizes that building ambitious projects requires extraordinary teams. That's true for your personal life too. Happiness is richer, and resilience is stronger when it's shared. The link between happiness and resilience is feedback-driven. When you're happy, you're more resilient because joy fuels energy and perspective. When you're resilient, you're happier because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes, so you live with less fear. The best design is to treat them not as separate goals but as mutually reinforcing outcomes. Practical design means building daily rituals that cultivate both. For happiness, gratitude journaling, intentional leisure, shared meals, spontaneous adventures. For resilience, physical training, stress management, deliberate discomfort, and reflective practices. None of these are complicated, but together they create a system where your baseline is higher than most people's peak. The beauty of designing happiness and resilience is that it liberates you from dependency on external circumstances. Instead of saying, I hope this year is good to me, you say, I've built a system where even a bad year can't break me. That's a radical shift. It puts you in the driver's seat of your own life instead of being a passenger tossed around by external forces. Over time, this design becomes part of your identity. You stop thinking of happiness as fragile or resilience as occasional, and you start seeing them as default states. You wake up knowing that joy is built into the structure of your life, and that setbacks are absorbed by the systems you've created. That's what it means to engineer a life worth living. It's not about avoiding storms, it's about designing a ship strong enough to sail through them while still enjoying the view. That combination, joy and toughness, play and grit, is what makes you unstoppable. Dreaming boldly is not about indulging in fantasies that sound impressive but never materialize. It's about expanding your vision of what's possible, and then aligning your actions so that those possibilities start to take shape in reality. The problem most people face isn't that they dream too big, it's that they dream too small, constrained by what feels safe, what feels socially acceptable, or what feels statistically likely. But history is written by those who dared to expand the boundaries of vision, who believed in outcomes that seemed ridiculous until they became inevitable. Bold dreams have power because they stretch your internal code, forcing you to question assumptions and limitations that keep you trapped in mediocrity. The moment you say, "What if?" with seriousness, you begin to reprogram your mind to search for ways instead of reasons. Elon Musk didn't wake up one day and decide Mars colonization was practical because the data said it was. He started with a bold vision and then engineered backward from that dream. That's how bold dreaming works. You don't wait for permission or proof. You imagine something extraordinary and then figure out how to make it real. Expanding your vision means deliberately breaking the mental ceiling that tells you, this is enough, or this is realistic. It requires asking yourself bigger questions. Instead of, how do I make a living? Ask, how do I create something that outlives me? Instead of, how do I avoid failure? Ask, what impact would I make if I wasn't afraid of failing at all? These are questions that rewire the brain to operate on a different scale. And once your brain is trained to think bigger, your actions naturally scale to match that vision. But bold dreams are not solitary, they are collaborative by nature. When you start sharing an audacious vision, you attract people who resonate with it, and together you create a gravitational pull that brings resources, talent, and momentum. Nobody builds rockets to Mars or reinvents the automotive industry alone. Nobody creates transformative art or life-changing companies in isolation. Expanding your vision isn't just about your personal goals, it's about setting a vision big enough that others can find themselves inside it. That's what makes bold dreaming magnetic. Another critical part of dreaming boldly is understanding risk. Playing it safe may feel comfortable, but it guarantees average results. Bold dreams carry risk because they challenge the status quo and demand that you step into uncharted territory. But the paradox is that the bigger the vision, the more energy and resilience you generate, making it easier to endure the risks and setbacks along the way. When your vision is small, obstacles feel overwhelming because the reward doesn't justify the pain. But when your vision is huge, every obstacle feels like part of the story, another test on the way to something worthy. Expanding vision also means transcending personal ambition. If your dream is only about your own comfort, your own wealth, your own recognition, it will eventually run out of fuel. The biggest dreams are the ones that tie your personal goals to a larger mission, something that changes lives, reshapes systems, or expands human possibility. That's why Musk talks about sustainable energy and multiplanetary life. Their vision's bigger than himself. When your dream plugs into something larger than you, it becomes a source of infinite motivation. You don't burn out as easily because the mission is too important to abandon. Practically, how do you design bold dreams? You start by writing them down with brutal honesty. No filtering for what feels realistic. If you could do anything, build anything, change anything, what would it be? Then, you reverse engineer. What's the first step I could take today that moves me closer, even by 1%? Bold dreams are intimidating until you break them down into executable steps. Colonizing Mars starts with testing rocket fuel efficiency. Building an extraordinary relationship starts with one honest conversation. Transforming your health starts with a single choice at dinner. Small actions stacked consistently against a bold dream eventually make it inevitable. Another important part of expanding vision is surrounding yourself with people who normalize ambition. If everyone around you is comfortable with small goals, you will unconsciously shrink to fit. But if you immerse yourself in communities where big thinking is the default, your own vision expands to match. Proximity shapes possibility. When you hear people casually talking about ideas that sound outrageous to the average person, you start to see that outrageous is just a synonym for not yet common. Dreaming boldly requires protecting your vision from those who will try to shrink it. People will call it unrealistic, arrogant, or impossible, not because it actually is, but because your vision confronts their own limitations. You have to learn to filter feedback, to distinguish between constructive input and projection of other people's fears. If you let the wrong voices into your operating system, they will corrupt your code and limit your potential. But if you hold fast to your vision, even in the face of doubt, you begin to embody the resilience that inspires others to expand their own. expanding vision also has to be dynamic. The dream you have today is just the starting point. As you grow, as your capacity expands, your dream must evolve. Bold dreaming is not a one-time declaration, it's a lifestyle of constantly pushing the horizon further. It's about asking, what's next? Not because you're unsatisfied, but because you know the human spirit is designed to keep exploring, building, and creating. And that exploration itself is what gives life its richness. Ultimately, dreaming boldly is about freedom. The freedom to refuse the script handed to you, the freedom to design your own trajectory, the freedom to say, the world may believe this is impossible, but I choose to believe it's inevitable if we commit. That's the essence of expansion. It's not arrogance, it's responsibility, the responsibility to make full use of the capacity you've been given, and to show others what's possible when you stop letting fear write the rules. And when you expand your vision, you don't just create a better life for yourself, you expand the horizon for everyone who comes after you. That is the legacy of bold dreaming. It's not just personal achievement, it's collective evolution. Owning your narrative and legacy is the final step in creating a life that is not only extraordinary while you live it, but continues to matter long after you are gone, because at the end of everything, what you truly leave behind is not the possessions you accumulated or the titles you held, but the story that people tell about who you were, how you lived, and what impact you made. Too many people surrender their narrative to others. They let society, culture, or even family dictate the storyline they follow, ticking boxes that were never theirs to begin with. Graduate here, marry then, buy that, retire quietly. And while there is nothing inherently wrong with those paths, the danger is that if you don't take ownership of your story, you end up living someone else's version of a meaningful life rather than your own. Owning your narrative begins with clarity. It's about asking yourself questions most people avoid because the answers are uncomfortable. What do I actually value? What do I want my life to stand for? What would I regret not doing if time ran out sooner than expected? Once you answer honestly, you begin to see how much of your current trajectory may be shaped by expectation rather than intention. Owning your narrative is the act of saying, this is my life, and I refuse to let external scripts define it. From that point, every choice becomes an edit to the manuscript of your existence, and like any good author, you must be ruthless about removing what doesn't belong and bold about writing what does. But it's not just about writing the story. It's about living it so fully that others feel its weight and inspiration. The power of owning your narrative is that it creates authenticity, and authenticity is magnetic. People are drawn to those who live unapologetically according to their values because it reminds them that they, too, have permission to live differently. Elon Musk doesn't fit traditional molds of CEOs because he never let tradition define his narrative. He owned it, mistakes and all, and by doing so, he created a legacy that extends beyond any single company. Legacy, then, is the natural outcome of a fully owned narrative. It is the echo of your choices, the residue of your character, the imprint you leave on people and systems long after your name stops trending. Legacy isn't about monuments or biographies, it's about how lives were changed because you existed. Did people feel more courageous because they saw your courage? Did they think bigger because you modeled audacity? Did they love deeper because you showed what commitment looks like? Those are the questions that define legacy. To own your narrative and legacy, you must think in terms of systems and symbols. Systems are the habits and structures you create that outlast you. For example, if you build a company designed not just to profit but to solve problems sustainably, that system continues to impact lives beyond your direct involvement. Symbols are the stories and rituals that embody your values, like traditions you create with your family that teach the next generation what matters most. Both systems and symbols are ways of coding your narrative into the future so that even when you are no longer present, your influence persists. Another aspect of owning your narrative is reframing failure. Most people let failure define their story negatively. They see it as the plot twist that ruined the arc. But if you own your narrative, you use failure as the texture that makes the victory compelling. Think about the greatest stories ever told. None are free of setbacks. In fact, the setbacks are what give meaning to the triumphs. If you want to leave a powerful legacy, you must not only endure failure, but integrate it into your narrative as proof of resilience, vision, and perseverance. That reframe turns failure from something that diminishes your legacy into something that strengthens it. Owning your narrative also means protecting it. The world will try to edit your story constantly, pushing you to conform, to compromise, to dilute. If you are not vigilant, your narrative becomes fragmented and inconsistent. Protecting it requires boundaries, knowing what and who you will not allow to influence your core values. But it also requires openness to evolution because a powerful narrative is not rigid, it evolves as you grow. The key is to ensure that every evolution is chosen by you, not imposed by fear or pressure. At its highest level, legacy is not about what you achieve, but about what you enable others to achieve. True legacy is catalytic. It's when your story gives other people permission, tools, and courage to write their own. This is why mentorship, storytelling, and example matter so much. By openly living your narrative and sharing its lessons, you create ripples that extend far beyond your immediate circle. Every time you refuse to let fear dictate your choices, you unconsciously teach someone else to do the same. Every time you dream boldly and act decisively, you plant seeds in the minds of others that may grow into forests of action you'll never personally see. That is legacy at scale. Ultimately, owning your narrative and legacy comes down to intention. You can drift through life, letting the chapters write themselves by default, or you can pick up the pen and craft a story worth remembering. And here's the truth. No one else is coming to write your story for you. If you want a narrative that matters, if you want a legacy that inspires, you must take ownership today, not tomorrow, not when circumstances are perfect, but now. Because every choice you make is already part of the story, whether you acknowledge it or not. So ask yourself, what narrative am I authoring with my daily actions? What legacy am I building with my current decisions? The future is not written in stone. It is written in habits, values, risks, and persistence. Owning your narrative is the decision to stop outsourcing your story and to start creating a life so intentional, so bold, so authentic that when people tell it in your absence, they say not just what you did, but who you were and why it mattered.